I don't let them steal from me. I don't let them take my stuff. I don't let them write essays and quote me without credit, you know? I have to stand up for myself too. That's how I can help make the world a better place, is by keeping my identity, keeping my life together, and keeping my world together enough that I can do some good for the rest of the world. And I think Hinduism, or Sanatana Dharma, also works the same way. It can bring a lot of beauty to the world. It can bring a lot of good to the world. It can bring peace. It can bring happiness. But the way it does that is by packaging a lot of things together. It packages spirituality with science, with math, with art, with music. It puts everything together because that's the way you absorb these things. And if you take it apart, you steal and just throw random pieces at people, you're missing so much. The only way it can be of its best possible use to the world is to keep it all together.
I would like to add to what Sujarta was saying, because I agree completely. And I think when you allow, I think it's wonderful that our traditions like yoga and Holi are causing good in the world. Even the Holis, color runs are appropriation, but they're fun. And so they're bringing this joy, however momentary, to people, and that's a good thing. But I think when you strip all cultural context, all religious context, you start to completely separate things, and this makes it easier to demonize something. So every tradition, whether religious or cultural, has good things and bad things, right? And that's up to you to decide. But when you start saying, I like this, and that is not part of this culture, it makes the culture only about the bad things. So one example of that in the West is Islam. And when we talk about radical Islam in Syria and in these places, that terrorism is happening is a horrible, horrible thing. Human rights violations, whole bunch of problems with it. And then we talk about Rumi and this wonderful poetry and Sufi music that is also this beautiful part of Islam. And a lot of people start, I think we discussed last night about Sufism, a lot of people start taking this as, it's not really Islam, it's more music, it's more culture. Well, when you do that and take that beauty out of it, then it's very easy to reduce Islam and say, it's all about terrorism. That's the only thing that this culture exists for, and that's their only purpose, which is not true. And it hasn't happened to that extreme for Hinduism, but dissociating the two allows that to happen. So.
Thank you guys. I agree, we have a legacy to protect. But I was also wondering if the audience had any questions about what we were talking about. If you have any questions, you can go over to Armand there. He has the mic. Yeah, thank you.
All right, can everyone hear me? All right. I want to comment on the swastika thing because I'm a little bit older. I grew up here. My parents came in the 60s, so when I was growing up, it was a little bit tougher, right? We didn't have all these different associations and all these peer groups, right? So I grew up with peers who were 99.9% white Americans, Christians, and that's what I got. So when I had the question of swastika, originally, I didn't know how to respond. It was a very awkward thing, and naturally, Jews would be sensitive to it. Over the years, I started to study more and learn more, and I didn't have a platform to talk to a big group, but at least one-on-one I could talk to people, and I would ask them, especially if they're Christian, I would say, listen, is the cross a good symbol or a bad symbol? And they would say, it's a good symbol. I said, okay, hasn't that symbol been used by the KKK, burned on the lawns of black families they wanted to kick out or kill? And they go, yeah. And I go, well, then it's a bad symbol, right? And they go, no, it's a good symbol. It was just used bad by one group of people for a period of time. I said, exactly. It was misused by a group for less than 100 years, but it's a symbol that's been good for, let's say, 2,000. Swastika is a symbol that's been good for over 5,000, and it's misused by one guy in his administration for, let's say, 30 years. Is that fair? And usually they would say, gee, you got a point there. So on one-on-one, you can have those kind of conversations and address that. I want to just thank all of you for this discussion on appropriation. I think it's fantastic. I think we need a lot of, I always feel, this is my gut feeling on Dharma, or Sanatana Dharma, we've got the best content in the world, but we have poor marketing and branding. We need the best marketing and branding, and the whole planet will warm up to Dharma, naturally. I think it's a natural thing. We'll all march in that direction naturally, of our own will, but you need great marketing and great branding and great, identity and individual awareness to do it. But I think you guys did a wonderful job. Thanks.
My question is to, I think your name's Arnav, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so you raised the point about the Garba Ras and Indians using their own agency, integrating, I guess, wider elements into an Indian form. I just, maybe I don't understand enough, but when oppressed people use their own agency to integrate things of a dominant culture into their existing culture, is it really our fault? Because in a way, aren't we almost expected to by white society? Let's say if I went to a job interview wearing not a Western collar or something. I don't want to conflate my example. Maybe it doesn't apply, but is it as problematic? Because we're almost expected to, with your Ross team, maybe white people wouldn't get to access Garba at all if they didn't. I've seen an example of a Garba team using Mario, Super Mario Bros. Or whatever in their thing, and I don't, you might find it disrespectful, but maybe a white audience would never even get to experience Garba, or there would be no attendance of the Ross dance without the Super Mario thing. So I question, is it really our fault as Indians when I'm I would consider myself whitewashed, unfortunately, because of where I grew up. But is it our fault because it's almost white culture is forced upon me? So.
No, I think that's a really valid question. I'd have two rebuttals. I do think there's an element of good that comes from having other people learn Garba or Ras, but I think only within the context that they understand what that means to Hindu society. Now, notice you said culture a couple of times, and you said, is it bad that we're subsuming white culture into our Indian, or this dance culture? But the problem isn't that those things are being integrated, it's that they're slowly replacing the Hindu element of Garba Ras. You'll notice there's no education or discussion about what the songs mean or who Ambe Ma is, Bhavani Ma. Some of my white friends would make a joke they took a string of Garba words Gujarati words and then added Bhavani Ma to the end and said it jokingly, and I had to explain to them, this is Durga Matas, this is a very, during Navratri, this is 9 days of pure devotion. That's not a joke or something funny to say. So my problem is more with that substitution piece. You're right. Obviously, there is also an element to be had of taking something from in an oppressed environment and making something new out of it. But the question I have is, are Hindus in the West, especially the ones that have that privilege to go to college and start a Garba Ras team and get funding, are they really oppressed, or do they have a position of power and potential to show their side of culture without bringing in Western elements, right? It's a very fine, it's tough to create a fine line, but in my opinion, I think we've gone a bit too far, and the easiest way to see that's kind of with intention. Or do you think that the intention is, hey, let's preserve the religious and cultural pieces of Ras, but also bring in as many people as possible, or do you think it's kind of lost control of itself and is becoming, hey, let's get as many competitions as we can, let's get more viewers on YouTube? I think it started trending in that direction, and I think we've lost control of it completely. And if we did see more of the cultural, religious aspects of it, if we had education on what maybe the songs mean, or what the different dance types are, or who we're paying homage to, I think your point's more valid. But without those things, I think it's more substitution.
I want to just kind of do a quick continue on what Arnav said. I think we've all probably been in this situation where we are surrounded by people who are not part of the same culture as us, and we want to fit in, and we want our friends to see the beauty that we see, or just even a little bit of the beauty that we see in our culture. And so we want to find a way to express that, And I don't think we're at fault for that. Like, I think, like, I can sympathize and empathize with each and every person who's done that. I know I've done it before. But you don't have to strip something of its meaning to show your friends the beauty. I think it's also on us to make sure we understand the beauty of the culture of meaning. Like when we talk about Ras and Garba, we understand what that means. We understand why that devotion in itself is so beautiful, that we're able to share that as well.
And just as a quick counter example, if you look at East Asian cultures.
Turn the mic off. Mic off.
Sorry guys, I'll just use this. If you look at East Asian cultures, for example, Sean mentions sushi, you know for a fact that that has Japanese origin and is like very encompassed in that culture. And you know something about the culture, like the position in which they sit and eat, and kind of the rituals surrounding sushi. If you look at China, the way that China guards its kind of cultural treasures, you know that acupuncture is very Chinese. You know that there exists an entire like side of medicine called traditional Chinese medicine. And this is kind of a certified like path that doctors can take and get this official certification in, which is controlled by China. So, and then there are many beautiful Chinese dances and other kind of cultural symbols and artifacts that are really well advocated for and also guarded. So we don't have to look very far for positive examples of how we can kind of do what we need to do.
All right, I agree. It's a little known fact that Chinese medicine was brought to China by a prince named Bodhidharma. He was a Buddhist prince who left to China. And so actually, we did that too. So yeah, I agree with the flow of thoughts that have happened here. And I believe that it's HSC's goal, and we're working on fixing, getting back our Hindu legacy in our daily lives. Oh, great, sorry. One more question.
Hi, thank you for the discussion. So to me, this whole thing comes down to copyright issues that we wouldn't like to give it to anyone who, from whom this original idea did not originate from. Well, my question here is that we're trying to copyright something which has had a oral tradition to begin with, and that's why there are conflicts about historical dating as well. So, from the panel and anyone, that what is your suggestion as to how to copyright any ideas, or just copyright any ideas, any principles, which is original from scriptures like Rig Veda, which were written by rishis and rishikas. So what would your suggestion be if someone is using those ideas? For example, there is a researcher at Harvard, her name is Sarah Lazar, who is leading the research on mindfulness. In private conversation with me, she mentioned that that she is reading Yoga Patanjali Sutra, but I'm not sure she has given reference to them. But I would say that I have not read her work, but she's definitely reading those scriptures. So, so one could say that were written by Patanjali. But what about other ideas from Rig Vedas, which does not necessarily, we don't necessarily know all the people, because this copyright issues is actually a very recent thing. And so how do we, what would your suggestion be, that how do we gain copyright? Second thing is, one of them mentioned about the authority of science, that we knew about the useful utility of meditation for thousands of years, but only science only when we say that it has been proven by science, do we actually accept it? So how to counter this authority of science? Unless we do it, I don't think we will be able to sell or market the ideas which have been there for thousands of years.
Okay. So there's multiple issues. There's the internal control structure that we need to establish, and then there's kind of like an external control structure as well. I think this is a super long conversation. One of the things that springs to my mind is the powers or the institutional powers that exist that exert their influence, whether it's economically, financially, through funding research and giving grants to particular groups, and other like kind of legislative type things. That's like, for example, Harvard is a very powerful institution that can do these things and then put their stamp of approval on it. And so kind of addressing that specifically, and then internally, of course, the Indian government has done very little in terms of supporting any of the internal franchises and research outfits and other groups that can actually do some form of advocacy that can put a control structure around it. Like very, very little compared to what China does, for example. China has these Confucius institutes that they're setting up all over the world. And they're basically taking back control of their own discourse. And they're basically saying that they're the ones who certify who can talk about them, which is a massive institutional power shift that I think needs to happen. I think as far as copyrights and patents go, I'm not sure that is really in the spirit of the tradition. I think that that would be subverted, because if we just play on the playing field that is given to us by this dominant power force or asymmetrical power force, I think that we would be at an inherent disadvantage. And I don't think we function on copyrights or patents, so I wouldn't like to see it go that way, because then you can create a patent for anything. So just change one mantra or syllable or something and there's going to be a new patent or something. So I don't think it would work that way, but this is very interesting.
That's a really loaded question. It's a good question. I think I was the one who spoke about the authority of science, and I know the way I spoke about it made it sound like a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I'm a bio major, so I completely believe in the authority of science. And in a very broad sense, it's a very good thing, right? You want things verified. If someone came to you and said, "Oh, try this pill, it's been verified by Albanian mystics for centuries," probably should not take the pill, right? And so the authority of science is good, and I think it comes back to what Ravi was saying of these internal institutions. So Harvard is in Cambridge, and it's not right that someone is studying this mindfulness and not crediting Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which is all about this kind of stuff. And so if we set up institutions within India or with a Hindu background, then we can do the scientific work. It's not like we have a shortage of scientists in India by any means. So we can do this research, we can look into it and verify it, publish it in peer-reviewed articles, in well-known journals, and do it ourselves and still credit the original people who came up with this, like Patanjali and like the many, many rishis and munis. Yeah.
I'm just going to put in a little plug. I think you're going to enjoy Roger Drishti's talk later today, because this is a lot of what he talks about.
Hi guys. Yeah, I'll try to keep this quick as possible. I don't have like a specific question, but just like several comments that I want like a response on. And I think so. One of my like biggest kind of like disagreements is that we kind of are sort of missing one of the like very important aspects of like cultural appropriation, being like kind of the power structures that exist here. So for instance, what I see as cultural appropriation is like when Coldplay or Selena Gomez, wears like a sari in their in their music videos, and that's what people see as our culture. But the part that I don't as much agree with is kind of the Hindu American, our cultural appropriation of the culture. And I read like a really interesting article about this, basically about how it is our struggle here, and the reason that that kind of cultural appropriation is so harmful is that we are trying to take ownership of a culture that, it's harder for us to have while here as like families, as either immigrants or, of generations of like where families are trying to protect that culture. And so I feel like, for instance, with the Ross, it is kind of a way of our expression of our own culture, while melding with the fact that we are American-born, like Desis or not Desis, where we're trying to like have that be our new culture and our new Hinduism. As I said, like in the previous panel, that journey of what Hinduism is a very personal journey, and like even with like classical dancing, my sister does kuchipudi and she's been doing it for like 12 years, and they've been moving to trying to incorporate some Western ideas to make that even more accessible to as many people as possible. So they have like a really cool dance called Synergy, where they take a Ravi Shankar Philip Glass composition, where it's a very like kind of Western mix, but still using the fundamentals, and that's how a lot of Rasa and Bhangra is still being done. Then I want to talk about like Holi a bit and why, because I've faced these struggles myself about what I should do about Holi. And I think Holi as a concept is meant to be bringing a community together regardless of, who they are, their personality, which is why I don't include an educational element to it. I think to truly experience Holi needs to be that kind of a community, just as like with normal like fall garba. And then the last thing I'd like have a disagreement about is the idea that when you are saying that you're a Hindu, that you can't reject the negatives. I think it's very important to reject the negative side of the culture that has existed for thousands of years, because there are things that in society that we have kind of moved on from. And so like those are like kind of my main points, is that we need to like be able to meld and move our religion and our view of religion as a personal thing into a modern framework, or like given the surroundings that we have. And I don't think that's cultural misappropriation. I think that's renewing a cultural learning.
Thanks for that question. So quite a few questions in there. So I'll try to tackle the one about Garbara specifically, and then the question towards the end. I think it's important to recognize, like, this is, why is HSC having a panel on cultural appropriation? Why did we use the word cultural, right? Because most of us here are from an Indian background. So for us, cultural might mean more of those Indian elements than the Hindu elements. But to me, the reason that we're having a panel on cultural appropriation, and I really hope, Rajiv Ji talks about this a little bit in his talk, but are any of you guys familiar with like his U-turn theory? Rajiv Ji's U-turn theory? In my opinion, one of the earliest stages that can be recognized in the U-turn of, so what the U-turn theory says is, it's not just something gets appropriated overnight, right? It's a gradual process over time where first a culture digests something, they find something likable and they start to integrate it into their practices. They open up yoga clinics and say, hey, the Hindus came up with this really cool idea of yoga. It's not just, hey, we're going to take this overnight. And then what happens is they slowly discard some of the elements that they don't find likable. Maybe our avatars, maybe some of the language we use, and then, over decades, centuries, it becomes unrecognizable and unattributable to Hinduism. So I think what you're saying is very valuable, that, this is an expression of our culture, but I'm fundamentally missing where the Hindu piece is left in Garbaras today, and I'm seeing a trend where it will continue to evaporate over time. Maybe we're not there yet, and like I said, there are very nice parts about that dance specifically, but other pieces like Holi, it's very nice how non-Hindus come together to celebrate Holi, but over time, if we don't reiterate that point of why Holi or Ras or these different pieces are valuable to our religion, then that Hindu piece will be discarded. Now, you said towards the end, sorry, I forget the exact statement you said. I'll leave it there because I can't remember anymore. But that's my main point, is I think HSC is holding this conference because the Hindu piece is evaporating from a lot of these points.
If you look at Hinduism, and Hinduism again is put in this box of religionism, like Sucharita mentioned. It's actually this incredibly vast tree of dharma, which has umpteen amount of branches and umpteen amount of fruits of all different paths and all different styles and approaches. It really depends on which part of the tree you water. Like, are you just watering like one branch and one fruit just to make sure that little fruit is healthy, and you really like that fruit, like the fruit of yoga or asana, whatever, or you really like that vipassana mindfulness thing, so you just water that. But you're not really watering the entire tree, and eventually the tree is going to wither away and not be able to produce any more fruit. Hindu Dharma has been incredibly dynamic and has changed to fit the needs of pretty much every circumstance encountered over the course of the millennia that it's existed. So you look at the Mahabharata, and apparently there's everything. The Mahabharata contains the entire world. There's nothing in it that doesn't exist kind of outside. So that is what we're seeing slowly being eroded away. And both internally and externally, and it is amazing that we can share it with the rest of the world, and we need to, because the rest of the world desperately needs it. But if we don't take a look at the harsher realities that we've seen happen to other cultures, for example, whether it's Southeast Asia, or of course Native Americans, and etc., I personally feel that down the line, maybe not in my generation or coming generations, but we will end up in museums where a lot of our stuff already is. A lot of our stuff that's still relevant today. That's kind of my personal opinion.
Thank you, Remy. I think we're gonna have our.
Can I just respond to that? Really quickly, what you're saying about, when we talked about dissociating the positive from the negative, and you said that we should do that. I think that there's a difference between completely ignoring, the negative aspects of something because it's unfair to the people who have been disprivileged because of something. I think instead what we should do is recognize that, all right, there are these negative things, and then work on reforming them. And that's kind of the distinction there.
That was what I forgot to talk about. I kind of misspoke. Like, I didn't mean we should defend every negative element of a religion or tradition, but when someone does say something like caste, cow, and curry, we shouldn't be so quick to dispel it just because it's easy to do so. We should be able to explain the nuances and, if needed, reform, but that's really what I meant. So thanks for helping me clarify that.
Hi, I'll make this really quick. So my question for this panel is based on a term I think I coined myself, generational culture. So nowadays I find myself listening to rap music, pop music, dancing to all these new dances that have been made. And I wanted to know your viewpoints on how you think this impacts our traditional culture. So when the lyrics of rap music nowadays, when we go to a Freddie Wap concert at Stony, versus when you go to a temple the next day to do puja, how do you think that this new generational culture is impacting our traditional values?
I think one of the important things to note is that culture is something that always changes. So this traditional thing. And so I say this to my parents all the time, okay, I know it's been that way forever, but my generation's different. We grew up in different circumstances. And my parents say, well, our generation was different. We moved here from India. My grandparents' generation was different. They were the first generation after independence. We're all a little different. And things change over time. I think the way globalization works means that there's a lot more that our generation needs to defend against in some ways. And I think we live in a time right now when recognizing things like cultural appropriation and our perspective on this is somehow a lot more sharp. It's a lot clearer in some ways, I think. I think we're able to put words to things and have the strength to fight things that the generations before us didn't necessarily have as strongly. So I think we need to take advantage of that. Like, every generation has its fights, and I think this is part of ours.
Just to add to that really quickly, I think that, you know, there is this interesting intersection of being second generation or moving here in early age, and it's all about that balance. And it's up to you to define what you believe in and what you value, and then also balance what you enjoy. So, for example, when I drive, I listen to mostly Biggie and Tupac. Like, that's my driving music. But when I study, I usually listen to like Bhimsen Joshi and Shiv Rock. I listen to both equally frequently, and I enjoy both. That doesn't necessarily mean that I have to, they're not mutually exclusive, you know, and you can grab this balance. It's hard, but you just do what you enjoy. You know, if you don't enjoy Biggie, don't listen to Biggie. If you don't enjoy Bhimsen Joshi, don't listen to him. But, yeah.
At Chinmaya Mission, we spend a lot of time talking about the three gunas, so like sattvic, rajasic, tamasic tendencies. So sattvic being like the uplifting tendencies. And what I've noticed is, you know, going into college and getting more freedom and being able to explore some of these more like pop culture, mainstream concepts, I think it's awesome, but I have a very hard time balancing going to the mandir the next day because I have a very hard time putting myself in that sattvic mindset. So I mean, I think it's fine, and as long as you recognize that, as long as you can find the balance for your sattvic, the uplifting tendencies, your rajasic and your tamasic tendencies, where you balance the material with that spiritual values, then I think it's totally fine in today's world.
I just want to make one comment. When we are talking about the positives and negatives of Sanatana Dharma, as some people call it Hinduism, we just have to make sure that we don't brand something as negative in Sanatana Dharma just because we don't understand it at present with our knowledge at present. So whatever we think is a negative in Sanatana Dharma, because there was a gap between the time period when it was followed strictly to the code given by the rishis and the present time. There are lots of things that happened and we lost some knowledge. So there are some ways, some points that we see as negative. But if you deeply go into that and understand that, it might not look as a negative. So there are some points. I'm not saying that there are no negative points, but the ones that we consider as negative, we have to look into them carefully and see that they are really negatives and not just with lack of knowledge being branded as negative.
And on that note, and on that note, I agree. We definitely have to find a way to, once we understand better our views of our Sanatana Dharma, we have to find a way to package it and not box it in just religion, as I said. We need to ship it with everything that it comes with, culture, which is constantly changing, and science and reason. And only if we can do all of those things at the same time can we actively achieve our goal. And now, guys, it's time for lunch. I'd like to thank the panelists for their time. I hope everyone enjoyed the discussion. We're going to break for lunch now and resume the conference at 1:30.
Yeah.
1:30? Are we gonna...
Hello. So just in 5 minutes, we'll go ahead and start serving lunch. We'll start the next session at 1:30 promptly. If you're still eating, that's fine. You can continue to eat during the next session as well. And before we get to food, ready?
Oh, awesome. We're going to do the Bhojan mantra, which is a traditional mantra chanted before we consume any meal. Just as a kind of explanation, the mantra itself signifies that everything encompassed in the act of eating, from the cooking to the smelling to the seeing to the consumption to the digestive fire, and everything else is God, essentially, or is Brahman, which is this ultimate absolute reality, this infinite consciousness that pervades and includes literally everything. So, should we do call and repeat, or? Yeah? Okay. All right, so please stand. Om Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagno Brahmanahutam Brahmevatena Gantavyam Brahmakarma Samadhina Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhi Tamastu ma vidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you.